Hi, it's Dr. Maggie Perry with Tell Me What You're Proud Of. This week we'll be having the fourth session with Nicole, and Nicole and I are talking after I met with Dr. Christina Pascarzi, and Nicole had two sessions where we primarily discussed the crisis that led her into psychotherapy, and then how she's used psychotherapy to increase her self-observation, her self-compassion, and her perfectionism. And that has had impact both in her relationships and in her work life. So Nicole, can you start us off about what came to mind as you were listening to the consultation that I had with Christina?
Yeah, I think it reminded me and re-highlighted some of the things that we have talked about in working together and some of the things that have really changed as I've been talking to you. I think one of the big things that we've talked about and worked on is self-compassion. And I think if I think about before and after therapy, I think one of the important things that you've helped me learn is actually just experiencing and letting the feelings and painful things peak and pass. I guess the hard feelings will just kind of peak and pass. And if you experience them, they will go and your mood will change. And I think the hardest part for me before therapy was kind of the self-criticism that I would attach onto those feelings. So if I felt anxious, it would kind of be like, why am I feeling this way? How do I make this feeling go away? How come no one else feels this way? And I think a lot of that was more painful than actually just feeling the feeling in the moment. Or if I went through something, say like a bad date, it would get like, why do I always go on bad dates? Like, what's wrong with me that this always keeps happening? So being able to learn self-compassion, it was a lot easier than to maybe deal with, say, a bad day at work. And those would just pass a lot easily than attaching all these other feelings and thoughts on top of it.
Yeah, that's great. So you would really add either catastrophic thinking or hopeless, helpless, worthless thinking that this is because of me, there's nothing I can do to change it and it's going to last forever. That makes sense. So actually the change, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm very aware that that's very challenging to do. So just to break it down a little bit more, I assume you first had to learn what the feelings were that you were experiencing. Were there any particular tools, or can you describe the process that helped you even recognize what you were feeling in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like I forget that in the beginning, and it's still one of the most challenging parts, that when I have a bad feeling, it just feels like an overwhelming wave of things. So it's hard to actually realize what's going on and realize oh wait, I'm feeling angry and now I'm feeling sad. And because of that, I'm attaching all these other feelings. It just feels like, oh my God, everything's out of control. I'm so angry, I'm lashing out at everyone. So it's hard to identify those. But in the beginning, I think you gave me an app that was really helpful. It was a mood tracker app, and it was a big grid of different colors. And you could kind of move a little clicker around between hey, I'm high energy, and high intensity right now, I'm probably angry. And it gave more language, all the different shades of feelings that I felt. And that was helpful to kind of track.
To cut you off for a second, that one's called Mood Meter.
Yeah.
Good example. Thank you. And tell me more about how you learned what feelings you were having.
I think it was in talking with you, it gave time to reflect and break down maybe an event or a painful time into a different, into a set of feelings. Then I think over time we were able to see a pattern where it's hey, if I feel really angry, I'm probably going to feel pretty sad afterwards. And then maybe even that for a few days. So in breaking down the feelings and reflecting with you and realizing a pattern, it's easier to identify oh, that feeling I'm feeling now because I was just really angry is probably this. And then know what might be coming next.
Yeah, that's great. And just to follow that a little bit further, can you tell why anger makes you feel sad?
I think, I don't know if defense is the right word, but I feel anger is a top feeling or an outward facing feeling, or it's a way to displace a really painful emotion outwards. And then I think that maybe the front of the emotion and then the back of the emotion internally is like a sadness. It's like almost at first there's like an outward outlash, and then it follows on the back of just like a deeper, sadder feeling underneath.
That's a really good description. And then can you tell why sadness can sometimes, or in the past, why sadness lasted for days? What else would you add to it?
Yeah, I feel like I would add, like we were talking about with the self-compassion, add like feelings on top of it of like, why do I feel this way? Do others
like
feel this way? And then it would feel,
Sounds like
yeah.
interpretations. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and then I think I would also just feel really lonely on top of like that feeling would follow. And then it would feel hard to reach out to friends and just feel like, oh, I'm really sad right now. And then it would just all kind of compound and last for longer than just a feeling that would peak and pass.
So if I can break that down a little bit, basically anger would then make you feel sad, or sadness and anger would show up at the same time. And then you would add the thought, I feel sad and no one else feels sad, which would trigger loneliness. And then loneliness would make you not want to connect. And it would be kind of self-fulfilling that the more that you withdrew, the more lonely you felt.
Yeah.
And now, in addition to having self-talk that's more compassionate, what do you do that's more compassionate?
I feel like when those feelings come, it's easier to be like, oh, this is just a feeling that I have that other people also have. Like, there's nothing that is like, it doesn't mean anything's like wrong with me. And then also reaching out to people or being like social when I have those makes it easier to get in and out of them. I think also I have like a number of friends that are in therapy, and I think they do the same things now. So it makes me feel even like less alone when I'm feeling those feelings. Like I had a friend reach out with everything COVID going on, just being like, I feel like really disconnected from everyone right now. And then I think just even those social signals of being like, oh, other people feel this way too. Like it's not such like a me feeling, like everyone's kind of going through the same feelings at different times.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, that does also speak to the people that you've chosen to be close with. It sounds like you all have similar values, and then you can support each other in similar ways.
Yeah, that's true.
That's great. Okay. I can imagine that. I know when you started, your perfectionism was pretty significant. Can you say a little bit about how perfectionism and self-compassion are related to you now?
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like perfectionism is like maybe the thing that comes in front to try and like fend off any self-criticism that I don't know could happen. In a way, it's like, hey, if I go through this perfectly, like I won't have to deal with any negative feelings anyone might have towards me, or like any negative feelings or backlash I might have towards myself. I think I also, before we started talking, I didn't realize that not everyone like thinks that way when they like prepare for a meeting and stuff like that. But yeah, again, like if there's a really stressful event, like a stressful meeting, it's already stress enough that you have that. And then I think I was just adding on a lot of extra thoughts and like kind of like hurdles for myself internally that just like added to the stress and made it a lot worse than it had to be.
It sounds like in the presence of the fear of a mistake, like if you had made a mistake, then you would feel embarrassed. If you felt embarrassed, then you would feel self-critical. If you started criticizing yourself, you would get sad and angry and ruminative and lonely, like that whole spiral that you just described.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, you were trying to prevent the mistake so you wouldn't have the spiral, which became really perfectionistic behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
And now what do you do differently?
I try and attach like a lightness to everything. And I think also just like knowing that you can't really control everything and like things are out of your control makes it a little bit easier.
How did you say that? So like that was so easy also. It's often really challenging to let go of control.
It wasn't easy at all. And it still like isn't easy. I feel like even recently I had like an interview and I feel like it was like a month-long process. I feel like I lost my mind a little bit, but it's not always easy still like in the moments, but it's easier, I guess, to try, and even reflecting back, being like, oh, I see like what happened here, or like what I was trying to do and what I was trying to control and stuff.
I can see how you can hold on to hope. So even if you have anxiety sensitivity as a biological factor and you get worried or anxious sometimes, it sounds like you feel hope about your own process, because when you look back on it, you're like, oh, that's where I was stuck.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, sure, like that I will face other stressful events, and that I will probably like, I think, approach them with perfectionism, but I think I'll have the tools to be more aware of like what's going on, and hopefully just try and be like, hey, maybe it'd be good if I just like went for a run instead of like rereading this document for like the 100th time. Like maybe that would be a better use of my time.
I imagine you now also have your own past experience to draw upon, where a time where rather than over preparing for a meeting, you went for a run and then the meeting turned out okay. Now you can use that to remind yourself that that's a flexible option for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Great. Okay. Are there other things that are coming to mind that have changed for you over time?
I think the biggest thing is like we talked about, just if I can just like figure out in the moment when things are painful to just keep it to that feeling. It's a lot less painful than having also to deal with like the feeling and the self-criticism and trying to control like the outcome and everything like that. So I think that's been like the biggest learning and the biggest practice piece too. And the hardest part still, I think, is identifying the feelings, or like when I might be in like a difficult feeling and knowing what playbook to use.
So it sounds like you're doing a really good job with the feeling of loneliness. Like you've really learned how to relate well to that one and reach out to friends rather than withdraw. What other feelings are challenging for you?
I think sadness in general, or even depression, it's like hard to know in the moment that like those are the feelings that you're feeling. It's like clearer after the fact. So I feel like with everything, to use like a more recent example, with everything COVID, I like didn't leave my apartment for a few weeks, which I think was also like health safety wise. But looking back, friends and family were like, we were kind of worried about you. And like my friend was like, yeah, I remember calling you a few nights in a row and you just like wouldn't pick up. And when you're in the moment, it doesn't feel like it's hard to like identify like, oh, maybe I was like avoiding friends, maybe I was avoiding going outside, maybe I was like self-isolating. But I think looking back, it's easier to piece together, but I think still being in the moment and trying to identify like, oh, I might have been going through like a down period, is hard.
What are some of the cues that you're going through a down period? Now looking back on it, like how can you prevent that in the future?
Yeah, I think it's probably shying away from things that I like to do generally when I'm in a better mood. So things like talking to my friends, hanging out with my friends, going outside. And I feel like there are feelings that I don't typically associate with like depression or a down mood that go with it. So just being like agitated, more irritable, and getting like more angry a lot quicker, like having a shorter fuse and stuff like that.
And what types of life circumstances or biological factors might make you feel more agitated or irritable?
I think if it's like a generally like stressful environment, I feel like more sensitive to that. I think also if I'm like not sleeping well, which again, if it's like a stressful period, that definitely has something to do with it. I feel like if I'm drinking more than I usually do, like that definitely has something to do with it. And if I'm not exercising also, that has something to do with it too.
And can you typically tell when those behaviors, like what do you think happens first? Those behaviors change, or you become irritable because of stress and then the behavior change?
I don't know. I guess it's hard to tell. They seem like so tightly wound together.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Can you say more about how, I know that you said the mood meter has been helpful and like coming to therapy on a regular basis to reflect has been helpful. And in a previous session, I think we talked about the things that you track, but how has tracking and self-monitoring impacted your life?
It's been helpful in figuring out like one, if I'm not feeling good, instead of almost having like the self-criticism come in and being like, why do I feel this way? Why am I stressed out? I have like a quantitative way to like be like, oh wait, this is like, these feelings are an outcome of like the lifestyle choices that I'm making at the moment. If I can just like course correct to do things that I know make me feel better, I'll feel better in a few days. So I feel like it gives me more like data about what's going on, and then also feels like it gives me a lever to like control my moods more easily too.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you, like many people, like what stands out is that your suffering is really episodic. So like you were just saying, like basically when you're engaging in all these healthy habits, like hanging out with your friends, exercising, sleeping well, drinking less, all of these things are like managing your work stress and your work-life balance well, you probably feel really good.
Yeah.
It sounds like you feel good. But there can be times where all of those fall away and you are more irritable, agitated, and depressed. So what do you make of that? How do you feel towards yourself knowing that you may have episodic periods of suffering like that?
I mean, it's like not amazing. Like ideally everything would just be like roses, that I wouldn't have to deal with that at all. But I think like it is what it is, and like knowing that I have ways to better control it or like flag that it might be coming, and then have ways to like make those periods not as painful as they could be or not go as low as they could be, is like helpful and makes me feel like I have control over them too.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, knowing that you have those biological vulnerabilities under stress, what helps you not make the episode less frequent and less intense?
I feel like knowing that like, okay, this is like a week to like maybe get more sleep, make sure I'm going to like, I like Pilates, go to Pilates every day, make sure I'm like eating well, make sure I'm like social activities, even if it doesn't feel great, like maybe space them out a little bit more than I would usually. And then I feel like as before, maybe before like I started talking to you, I feel like during those periods instead, I would just like stay at home by myself, like listen to really sad music, like open up a bunch of like existential like philosophy books and get like even deeper in a hole. And I feel like it would like last a lot longer, and be easier to just like be stuck in it.
Yeah, you would kind of do like mood congruent behaviors. So once you were starting to go down, you would do other things that brought you down, like listening to sad music, withdrawing, and reading kind of existential or depressing reading. So now you can see that when that's coming, you've got to do stuff that's like opposite action. Like you want to withdraw and you reach out to people. You want to stay in your bed and you go and exercise, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. Is it challenging under stress to, besides actually doing the opposite action, is it also challenging to like not be able to do exactly what you want to do? So deciding, after maybe when friends are going out for happy hour, if we're not in COVID, like deciding to go home to get a better night's sleep, does that bother you?
I think the thing I had the most trouble with was probably with dating when I was feeling like in that sad way. It would feel like, oh my God, I feel like I need to be doing these actions or I need to be going out, but like I really don't feel like 110% or like my real self. So I feel like I had trouble just like rectifying those two things or like figuring out the right way forward through that stuff.
And what do you think now about that, going on the date when you're not 100%?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's no like right way, but I feel like it's okay to just like go and do the action sometimes and just like show up, and it can be like practice even if it doesn't work up. And I think it's also okay if I'm in like a short bad mood to be like, hey, maybe this like is not the right activity right now and I should just like reschedule for next week when I know I'll be feeling a bit better and I can just focus on like exercising and like eating and like getting back to normal for this week.
So I imagine that that's trial and error, that sometimes you just push forward. and allow it to be like a non-perfect date. Other times you reschedule and let yourself do some self-care. Anything you've learned about that trial and error over time?
Yeah, I feel like there have been times that I've like gone on the date and then I end up having like 2 to 3 drinks and it doesn't go well. And then like the next day I'm like 5 notches worse than I was. So I think, yeah, just like listening to myself and knowing how past experiences have gone, gauging it too. Like maybe it's like, oh, if it's a first date, I'm not really sure like how it'll net out. This could just like make things worse tomorrow. Maybe like next week is better. But yeah, I think it just depends on the circumstance and trial and error.
Yeah, it might be a metric of uncertainty. So
Yeah.
a first date is a much more uncertain situation. So you're much more vulnerable to whatever direction your mood is headed. Where if you have some sense of what's going to happen, you might be able to challenge your mood more effectively.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and even getting broader than that, I think making a decision when you have some sense that you have some space between the mood and like you see the mood for what it is and you have some space to decide how you're going to respond to the thoughts and urges that come with it. That's like if you have no space, that's probably a time that you need to focus on self-care. Whereas
Yeah.
if you have some amount of space, you can do something that's a little bit more uncertain.
Yeah.
Thank you for that example. So tying it all together, how do you imagine things will go from here for you?
I think I definitely have like a set of tools now to better identify like my mood and figure out what's going on. And then I have a set of tools to help like course correct and like get myself back in a better place. I think the challenge is still like being able to identify those moods as they're happening. So I think I'll just like continue to work on that and continue to like reflect on past things and be like, oh, that was going on. Like I was feeling this, that, and the other way. So hopefully in time, it'll be easier to like flag those things as they're happening in real time.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Anything else you want to add before we end?
That's it. Thank you, Maggie.
Okay, see you soon. Thanks.